Welcome to the Mental Health Raw and Open podcast with your host, Jody Betty.
Hi, and welcome to the Mental Health Raw and Open podcast. My name's Jody. I'm your host, and today our special guest is John Acosta. John, so nice to see you. So nice to have you on the show. How are you, my friend?
Good, Jody. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Tell me about yourself, man. I know, you've been into the space, and, I know you're trauma informed, and every time you speak, I'm like, oh, knowledge. I love it. Tell me a bit about yourself.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to say just thank you for having me on the podcast. This is great. You host an incredible space on X that, I always jump in. They're great titles, and talking about trauma and talking about people's stories is really important. So thank you for having me, and I'd
Of
love to
course.
expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, man. Go ahead. It's all yours.
Yeah. So, well, a little bit about me. I'm a father of two, happily married, but Air Force veteran, and
Oh,
all of that has happened as a result of the opportunity that I've had on dealing with unresolved trauma in my family system, basically through a methodology called family constellations. And it's a methodology that is really detailed in a book by an author named Mark Wolin.
okay.
He won the Nautilus Award. I think it made best trauma books of 2023 on some of the lists.
Oh,
But
awesome.
the title of the book is "It Didn't Start with You," and I think that really summarizes the concept that we inherit unresolved trauma from our family system out of loyalty to our parents, right? That we, in some capacity, say, and this is a subconscious momentum, that in some capacity we say, I love you so much that I will take this on for the family, right? And that may
Right.
be depression, abandonment, emotional unavailability, abuse, be in an abusive relationship or be the perpetrator in a relationship. All these dynamics come from a hidden dynamic in the family system, right? It might
Right.
be addiction, it might be other things that come in, right? And if you've ever, and this is a telltale sign that you're in a pattern, is when logic is not present. And what I like to say is that when logic is not present, entanglement to unresolved trauma is. And that's like, it's like, why do I keep doing the same thing, right? Your logical mind is like, I'm doing something that is not beneficial for me, but I keep doing it, right? And so that talks about an entanglement that is like, I'm in almost like an undercurrent that's happening in the family system. And until those patterns are revealed, right? And Carl Jung talked about this a little bit, said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will drive our lives and we will call it fate, right? And that's what that's talking about,
Right.
right? It's like that underlying loyalty in the family system that when we uncover that, we can heal it, right? And simply grow out of it. It's not a judgment towards it. It's not an excuse. An excusing of the behavior also. It's simply an acknowledgement of what is. And that's the methodology that I've learned through family constellations that I'm extraordinarily passionate about. I think it has the capacity to help heal the world. And I know it's a big, tall order and it sounds very noble, but I in some capacity have this calling to do this, and it's what I'm called for, and I have a knack for it, and it's just natural, like a fish in water. And I jump in spaces with people that I don't know to have very interesting conversations with people like yourself. So that's pretty much
That,
a little bit of the background. Yeah.
that's so awesome. And it's funny that you say that because I'm adopted. Uh, I was in the foster care system until 18 months,
Mm,
went through horrific abuse and then was adopted into an abusive family.
mm,
But as an adult, when I went back to look at research my biological family, it was crazy to see that the generational trauma that had gone within them and that Children's Aid was involved with their family for basically since Children's Aid started. And it
mm,
was just like this repeated pattern. And I met my half sister, I guess, and like there was so much in common, even though we had like never met. It was
Yeah.
so crazy. It was just like, what? Oh my God! Like we have like so much of the same trauma without even going through the same experience.
Yeah, yeah. I could definitely see that. And the very interesting, and when I usually talk, I talk from a meta perspective. I don't necessarily talk about from the here and now, because in the here and now it's very entangled, right? It's like when we talk about these things. So when I talk a lot about these concepts, it's like the meta concept, right? We talk about our parents from the meta concept, from the esoterical concept, right? And a lot of this work talks about systems. It's like to understand that we all, regardless of, unless you're immaculately conceived, which I would love to meet that next person, right? We all come from two people, regardless of the circumstances. And those circumstances sometimes are extraordinarily painful, and sometimes they're beautiful, and everything in between, right? And so to understand that we came from two people, that already is a system. A system is defined when two things have a relation to each other, right? So those two people created another person, right? And so there's that triangle system. And the interesting thing when adoption comes is that there's a person comes from two different systems, right? There's the system that biologically created you, but there's also the system that raised you. And um, what happens, and when people are in close proximity, they become part of that system, right? So, and when we do family constellations on people that are adopted, there's huge benefit in recognizing both sets, right? Both
Right.
families that we came from. And a lot of the guilt, a lot of the remorse, a lot of the shame that comes from it comes from the fact that we come from two systems and they're not recognized, right? And once we recognize them and it becomes clearer where we came from, we can start outgrowing those patterns, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I was yeah, CPTSD and the trauma, some of the trauma I've been through. And I repeated like the same patterns for so long
Mm,
because I was responding to everything just like emotionally reactive.
yeah.
And, one thing in the past year that I worked really hard on was some inner child work. And
Mm,
I also started going to stoicism spaces because at first I thought it was going to be like this really manly concept and blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, how is this stuff that's like ancient so practical in today's
yeah,
world?
exactly.
So I've been practicing like, quote, the stoic pause. And it's been
Hmm.
so helpful for me to like just not overreact. I can now like in most situations, I can, put the phone down, not react, take a breath, focus on my breathing, walk away from the situation. Whereas a year ago, I would have been like, "Rah!" the
Yeah,
explosion,
exactly.
right?
And that's such a beautiful statement because it really talks about the growth of somebody, right? That they can take those 2 or 3 seconds to take a deep breath and say, like, am I reacting from me or am I reacting from my trauma? And that's like because the trauma comes with so much so much undercurrent, so much momentum. That's like, am I going to be abandoned again? Am I going
Oh
to be
gosh.
abused again? Am I going to be, in this dynamic again? And our fight or flight reaction comes in, and then we're off to the races, right? We're entangled in that momentum and that systemic momentum that's already happening. That when we were children, kept us safe.
Yes,
That was
absolutely.
extraordinarily effective to keep us alive. That kept us surviving, right, rather than perishing in that. So that fight or flight it's doing its job. It's just no longer appropriate for today's dynamic, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Because Um, it's only again in the past year where I've been able to feel less hypervigilant. Like I
Mm.
was saying to a friend the other day, like if I go
Oh,
into a restaurant, right, I cannot help but hear the conversations of the people around me because my ears are so focused on making sure my area is safe. Even though logically I know I'm safe, I'm in a restaurant, nothing's going to
hmm,
happen. But the trauma brain comes in and says, "Whoa, wait a second here. You need to be able
yeah.
to dissect everything around you." And so now I've been working on like the trauma brain ran my life for a long time. And now I've been working on, shutting it up and putting it in the backseat of my car so it's not driving my brain anymore.
Mm, yeah. That's such a powerful realization to say. today I'm not my trauma, right? It's like today I don't have to operate for my, today I choose to not operate for my trauma.
Yeah.
And even though it helped us, we can be in gratitude to it. It's like, thank you for
Mm-hmm.
helping me survive, right? And
Yes.
say today, but today I choose to not react from that. And when you talked about inner child work, is like so much of this comes from the disconnection of our inner child, right? That inner child had to do what they had to do to be able to survive, right? Now
Oh,
we can
yeah.
say, and this happens in family constellation workshops a lot, is that people reconnect with their inner child, right? That age of 6 or 7 when they had to disconnect, or 3, or even 2 where they had to disconnect, you can go back in the meta, right? In this, esoteric meta, and reconnect and have that connection and say, please come with me. And though you'll reconnect with that and then slowly integrate every single aspect of who you are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we talk about
Right.
narcissists a lot, right? It's like, what's a different conversation? I hear this about, I married a narcissist, or my mother was a narcissist, or my father was a narcissist, whatever that is. It's like, what is a narcissist? Is somebody that is surviving from their that childlike instinct, right? It's like, and
Yeah.
rather than saying narcissist, you can say, oh, that person is in the position of their inner child, right? That they have to deal with whatever's most present, that they have to be egotistical, that they have to have the world revolve around them, because if not, they won't survive. And so when
Mm-hmm.
you start looking at people from their inner child, and I put a post on X recently, it's like most people are just running around like hurt little kids, right?
Yes,
And if you
absolutely.
can see people from that perspective, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And then one
Yes.
child is raising another child, and it's like, this is not, and that their needs are competing, then that's a recipe for disaster. So it's
Yeah,
like, let's educate the world about breaking those generational patterns of trauma and not repeating them. Because I've got
absolutely.
kids and I don't want them to deal, inherit the stuff that I inherited, right?
Yeah, I was absolutely like, I made a conscious decision at 19 when my mom died that I would not have children, just because there was this core terror. It wasn't even a fear, this core terror that I couldn't protect them.
Mm,
I couldn't give them what they needed because of my quote trauma, and that I was going to pass it on. And to me, that it just wasn't worth the risk being adopted. I don't have that, that blood connection per se.
yeah.
So, it just made sense for me, not to put someone else's life
Mm,
in any sort of risk that I couldn't protect them of. And, like in hindsight, I realized I probably could have managed, but at the same time, I'm only, 70% through my healing journey. I still have a
mm,
lot of work to do. So, that was kind of a sacrifice that I decided, because I was just, terrified that I wouldn't be good enough. And core with adoption, comes, core abandonment issues. And I
yeah.
was in, I think, 5 foster homes before
Mm,
18 months. Um, and removed from them all for abuse, neglect, drowning, you
right.
name it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just like a terror. So I was like, no, wait, man, I'm not doing this.
Yeah. It's understandable. And, congratulations for being so down the path of your healing. That's not easy, especially, you have every excuse in the world, right? And that's the
Yes.
courage that it takes to choose a different path is a massive win in itself, right? Is to say, I'm self-aware now through all the work, and you've obviously done a massive amount of work. It's like, I'm self-aware enough now to say, today it stops with me, that I can be the gatekeeper for these future generations. And what I mean by even like our projects are our children as well. The things that we
Yes.
are involved with, the efforts, the missions that you choose to take on these life are also these offsprings of us, right? It's like, that's why they're called offsprings, right? Because we do in some way bring these things into the world. So, the podcast that you have is that's the same thing, right? It has the same dynamics, and they do inherit some of those things. And so obviously you have the successful production that you're birthing, right? It has the essence of you, who you are in it, ingrained in it. And I'm honored to be a small part of that. So, I think looking at it from a system is a really beneficial way to look at it as well, to say, you've chosen to do this, and you've chosen because you could have made any choice, right? You could say, I
Yeah.
want to just like do my own healing work, and I'm not going to help people go through this or create context or create conversations around that. And, it shows of the consistency that you have of how powerful of a change agent you are.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I think for me, I sat for so many years going like, what do I generally have wrong with me that this
Mm.
happens so many times? And then, when I was able to, one key thing was, realizing I am not my trauma.
Yeah,
Nobody is their trauma. You are
correct.
still a being. You have been traumatized. These are things that happen to you. These are not you.
Yeah.
So as soon as I could separate that, I think that gave me like a little bit of a different perspective to be able to
Mm.
approach it. And then I was like, something good has to come out of this. So when I sat back and analyzed it, I realized, well, the gift from my trauma is empathy.
Mm.
So I am an empath, and now I have all this knowledge from trauma. So what good is it if it just rattles around my head,
What
right?
a gift.
So
Yeah.
I felt like, you know what? I need to just start writing and share my story with the world and see, who it touches or who it can help. It's lovely to be able to give back out of disaster.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's, what was coming up when you were saying that is that, there's a saying that I love is that what happened to you is not your fault, but it's your responsibility to fix it because nobody else can. Right.
Yes.
And, I think the stages of this is like, okay, we're in our trauma, then we become empaths, and then we achieve understanding. And I've struggled with this concept. I was having this long conversation with somebody that I respect about empathy, right? And I do believe that in empathy, there's a little bit of an exchange that we take on other people's energies, right? Is that we take that thing on, right? Is that when we open ourselves and are vulnerable to that, there's an exchange when we have a difficult conversation with somebody that has gone through something traumatic, that we take on a little bit of that energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so protecting yourself as a person that has gone through trauma, that is on the healing journey, right, is extraordinarily important. Is to
Yes.
protect the vessel, because the ideal scenario would be for you to do this as long as possible and help as many people as possible. And the protection of the healer per se is priority number one, right? And I think that solidifies with time, and then you can achieve understanding, because in constellations as a facilitator, we deal with some of the most difficult dynamics that human beings have ever seen, right? Like they're at the core of things, right? Talking from all levels of abuse and all levels of abandonment and just very, very complex things. And our primary responsibility is to take care of ourselves so we don't entangle in the dynamic. And there's a pervasive thought in this movement that talks about, you're ready to become a facilitator when you heal your relationship with your mother and your father. And the reason for that is because when you no longer judge your parents, and you have achieved understanding that they're just human beings, right? They're just human beings trying to do their best with what they have.
Yeah.
That's it, with no judgment, with no entanglement, with no you just see it as it is, right? As an adult, from an adult perspective, not from that wounded child perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When you can truly understand, you're free.
I was I didn't even know I bought an inner somehow I just had this like feeling. Someone said to me, you need to do some inner child work, and I was like what even is that? So I
Yeah.
went and bought like a
Yeah.
workbook, and it was like the best thing. It was only a small workbook, but it had me writing letters to my abusers and my father and
Mm,
all these people. And the main goal was to just write, to get it all out, all the things
yeah.
you could never say, accept the apology you're never going to get. And when I was done, I had like an 18-page letter to my father. And I'm a big proponent in when you're doing a trauma dump, there's no reason to go back and read it. So
Yeah.
I trauma dumped. I took the pages, I ripped them up, and I tell you, I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders.
That's huge. Yeah, that's huge. That it's huge to have that release from that visceral place, right? And I think that that's a really important stage in this journey, And then there's another phase of this that's so powerful, because you can start looking at them as wounded little children as well,
Yeah.
and giving back the stuff that no longer belongs to you. Like, well, this isn't mine. This is yours. This isn't mine. This is yours. You can start giving all that stuff back, and just be like, I'm here. I'm in my place as your child. And this sometimes is very tough for people to do, but it's so powerful to have this movement, is to say, dear mom, dear dad, thank you for giving me life. That's it. No judgment, no entanglement, not taking anything that belongs to them. Because at the end of the day, we're here because two people came together. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we can say, regardless of the circumstances and how difficult they were, and in some people's circumstances, they're atrocious, right? To just say, thank you for giving me life. I have this opportunity to experience this because of you. As simple as that.
Absolutely. And I know with when my mom died, I was 19, and I think when someone dies, you almost like put them on this like golden pedestal, because in your head you're like, oh my God, they can't defend themselves. How could I say anything wrong? So it took me like a bunch of years to realize, wait a second.
Yeah.
She did the best she could, but she was also a battered wife. She was dealing with depression. She had cancer. So when I step back as an adult and look at it for the situation, I see she did the best she could with what she had. But I can now also not lay blame, but take the shame off my shoulders that I'm carrying, the expectations that I was carrying that aren't even mine. These voices in my head, telling me you need to do this and you need to live up to that or you're a failure. I didn't set these expectations when I was 3 and 4.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
There's someone else's expectations, so it's now time for me to put them down and now focus on what I want for me.
Yeah, exactly. And you make such a good point. It's like, it's not necessarily about laying blame. It's just giving back what doesn't belong to you, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
assume, and that's why a lot of people talk about, in this context, they talk about victim shaming, or they're like, hey, this is victim shaming. It's like, no, 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 no. It's not about victim shaming. It's about, there's, in these dynamics, out of loyalty to our family system, we take positions, right? Whether that's the perpetrator or the victim. And we fill those positions out of a subconscious loyalty to our family system. And it's not to say that's your fault, to lay judgment to that, right? It's like, and that's where entanglement comes from. It comes from judgment, right? It's like, I am better than you. And what I mean at judgment, what I'm really saying is the emotional judgment that comes from a place of righteousness, right? It's like, you have wronged me and I am better person than you are. Like that's what I mean. It's like not necessarily because a lot of people conflate those two things. It's like, when we're able to release those judgments, we no longer entangle. And we're able to give those things back and just simply say, and I'm obviously saying this from a place of, tons of work, right? I've been doing this since 2008, and I was a hurt, child, right? And that turned into a broken adult that, through many years of doing this stuff, was able to kind of put myself back together with a lot of help from a lot of people that have been mentors and teachers in my life. And it's just, we can really give those things back. We can give the blame, and we can give the shame, and we can give all that back that doesn't belong to us, like you just said. And it's such a powerful position to be in. And we take, and one of the things that happens is, Bert Hellinger, the man that started this work, right, the family constellations work, has one of his first books is called The Orders of Love, right? And the Orders of Love, it really talks about us assuming the position in our family system, right? That we are the child, that we're not the partner to our parent, right? Or we're not the parent to our parent, or we're not entangled in somebody else in the family that wasn't recognized, right? That we didn't take the position of an uncle that died as a child, right? Or we're not taking on the position of a sibling that wasn't born, or that we have siblings that weren't born and they weren't acknowledged in the family system, that they weren't given their place, that they weren't reconciled. And so a lot of these, what we call disorders in the family system, come from not being in our rightful place as a child of our parents.
Yeah, that is like 100% bang on, because I mean, my mom made the mistake of, making me her confidant at
Mm,
5. So like I can literally remember the date, the time, what was going on when she sat me down and, told me all about the beating that had occurred the night before. And at
yeah,
that point in time at 5, there was no more child. There was now a 5-year-old who had to somehow figure out how to protect my mom from
yeah.
these horrific things that were happening. And when I go back and look at it, at first I was like, well, she didn't have anyone to tell. And it was the 70s and 80s. And, it wasn't like domestic abuse was talked about and stuff. So, and then I was like, well, wait a second, that's still not right. You know,
It's a lot of
um,
responsibility for a child.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it just it I was already traumatized, so I was already, way older than I was, like
Mm,
for my age, and then turning into like a little parent at 5, there was like now I can go back and say, oh, you poor little 5-year-old, like you did a really good job, but don't carry shame for the things that you couldn't have stopped. Like, and I'll look at a 5-year-old and go, well, how was a child that's 5 who wants to play Lego? Like that,
yeah.
they just want to like do kid stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, it was just really releasing for me to just be able to, hand all that stuff back to whoever it belonged to and just say, you know what? There's nothing a 5-year-old can do to stop domestic abuse.
Yeah.
Facts.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's no way that you should carry around the responsibility of thinking that you have the power of being able to stop something like that to happen.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
did for a very long time. I was like, oh, I could have done this, or what could I have done? And then I'm thinking, no, there's nothing.
There's
There's
nothing.
nothing. It
Exactly.
shouldn't have been my responsibility to have to do so in the first
Yeah,
place.
exactly. And so,
You,
Rumi talks about this that says that the wound is where God lets the light in, right?
I
And
love
that's
room.
like it's such a powerful statement. It's like, yes,
It is.
the trauma, the wounds is where we become these transformational creatures. And that's the story of the Phoenix, right? Is that we become these transformational agents to be able to create a better world. And we, when we look this, like if we zoom out, 30,000 feet or whatever you want to say, um, we see that it's by these little movements of people that break these curses and break these generational traumas that the whole system, like if we're all a system, right, and we're all connected, and that's where the one in ZuluOne comes from, right? Is that I do believe that we're one consciousness, right? That we have this
Yes. Yeah.
substructure of consciousness that unites us all. Call it God, call it source, call it the universe, call it Mickey Mouse, whatever you want to call it, right? Um, that's the idea, right? That we're here in some way to create a little bit of a movement, and this is creates momentum. And at each time, each iteration of every human being that's here, we're trending towards a more cohesive, more stable place that we can create incredible things, right? So I think that's just part of I think it's a feature of our system rather than it being like
Right.
some disorder of it, right?
Yeah. You said you mentioned something about you guys do workshops.
Yeah, correct. So, in our current iteration, so there's family constellations are pretty popular globally, right? They're very
Okay.
big in Europe. They're very big in South America, Canada. There's some facilitators. You're in Canada, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the U.S. it's starting to become popular. There's right now. I was just actually watching one of the episodes. There's a series on Netflix called Another Self, and there's two
Okay.
seasons. It's a Turkish series. It's a little bit slow at the beginning, but it's a Turkish series on constellations, and
Okay.
there's workshops that happen all over the world. If you look up on Facebook family constellations, it will show up like the International Community of Constellations, the Facilitators of Canada. There's some incredible facilitators in Canada that I have the pleasure to know. If you literally Google family constellations in my area, it will show up, and
Okay. Cool.
it's
I will.
right now not very culturally popular. It's extremely effective. There's some criticism to it because people don't really understand the concepts that we're dealing with. Um, and it's deeply in the phenomenological space, right? We don't
Hmm.
know why this works. It just does. And what I joke with a lot of people is like, you don't have to pay anything more to get the secrets. It's like yoga, right? It's like you can either do it once, not do it, learn about it, do it, or you don't have to like join a religion. You don't have to pay to get more information. You don't have to join a religion. You don't have to do anything, right? You just it's a practice, right? And so
Mhm.
you do the practice and then you leave and that's it. It's like you do it one or two or three times and that's pretty much it's done. And so that's the beauty of this work is that it's extraordinarily effective. And so people really don't know where to put it. Um, traditional like cognitive based therapy, talk therapy,
Oh
right?
God,
It's like
been
you
there,
do it
done
over and
that.
over and over again. No disrespect to those guys, right? It works for people and that's okay. But this is just another tool in the tool set that is not necessarily the silver bullet, but it's extraordinarily effective in uncovering those hidden dynamics in family systems.
I honestly had never heard of it, and
Yeah,
I am all about like, I've done 5 years of trauma therapy. I did CBT, I did DBT, and then I was just stuck. And I felt like, okay, well, this must be like the end of my healing. I can't heal any further. And then I was like, no, it's time for me to explore like alternative, theories and listen to different people talk at different stages of their trauma and healing.
yeah,
And just doing that alone, I think I've probably learned more effective coping skills that I can put into practice than I did in therapy.
yeah,
And not that, not bashing therapy, to each his own, but CBT and DBT just wasn't for me. It didn't really
yeah,
do anything. It didn't do the rewiring and whatever else it was supposed to do.
yeah.
So, I sought elsewhere, and it's just amazing how many, different approaches there are that people don't know about.
Yeah, and that's the it seems like everywhere I look, I've seen a new kind of therapy, right? And I've been involved with this for a long time, and I'm extremely practical. So when I was in the military, I wasn't a warrior. I was a jet engine mechanic. I fixed airplanes, right? So I have a knack for fixing things, and I'm extraordinarily practical. It's either broken or it's fixed. And I like,
Right.
tinkering with things and fixing stuff, right? I never got shot at. I didn't shoot anybody. I don't have any, like, it wasn't the career path that I was on. And so this for me has been just extremely practical, right? And I run a business. My day to day job, I have a day to day job that I run a business and been doing that for 10 years. And I'm just extraordinarily passionate about helping people process through trauma. And this is the most effective tool that I found. I'm just keep going back to it, right? And I just understand it. And I try to, I host a podcast called the ZuluOne podcast that I talk about this. This is the subject that I talk about. It's people that have done constellations, other facilitators from around the world. And we have a conversation about what's happening and from this perspective, because it is
Right.
really a perspective is when you cross the threshold of family constellations, you start looking at everything through a systemic lens. You're like, oh, this is repeating of a pattern that came before this stuff. And you really start understanding the world from patterns, from a pattern perspective. And it's like when you didn't know math and then suddenly you know math and you're like, I can't put the genie book back in the bottle. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's just been extremely effective with it, right? It's like once you
Mhm.
start understanding, and obviously it sounds like you've done a lot of work, is that when you start understanding the themes, you're like, I can't not understand them, right? And it's like,
Yeah, I
from,
can't unlearn that.
yeah, exactly. You can't, and 12-step programs are extremely effective. They're effective for certain things. And I think this all is tools in the tool belt, right? I'm just a really big fan of
Mm.
this one. So that that's the biggest thing that I've focused on lately is and I think this is the methodology that I like the best.
Well, that's awesome because
Yeah.
I when we're done here, you have to send me your podcast link. I'll post it when I do the show notes. But I'm going to listen to some episodes because, like, I'm now very, I have a curiosity as towards, where your theories are and where
Yeah.
you're coming from, and I like a different perspective. I find just sometimes even just shifting perspective on something, like for so long I was afraid of everything, afraid to do something new, like even like try art or try painting. I was like,
Mm.
oh God, I'm gonna suck at it, it's blah blah blah. And then I'm like rationally like, who's looking at my art? Like, I don't expect to be Picasso or anything, so like,
Yeah.
just like color outside the lines, it's okay. And to be able to go back and give myself, my inner child, like permission that things are okay, to do. And it's been fun And now I am approaching things instead of with a sense of fear, I'm trying to approach it with a sense of curiosity.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, what could
Oh,
happen if?
man, that's so telling of how far you've gone, because curiosity is the thing that drives me more than anything. And that it's emergent of healing. I think curiosity is an emergent property of healing, because you're coming from a place of understanding rather than a place of rejection and lack. And so that's
Right.
like, it's such a powerful place to be in. And I think we're very aligned, because constellation talk is about perspective. That's simply what it is. It's like it's like, as a child, right? Like, I don't think I really matured until I started seeing my parents as people rather than seeing them as these omnipotent, beings that controlled my life in every aspect, for good or for bad, right? That they could not do any
Hmm.
wrong. That my dad was the strongest man that I ever met, and my mom was the most smartest, the smartest person that I ever met. They have all the answers to everything, and I see this in my kids, right? I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old that see me as this, this thing. I just constantly try to remind them, like, I'm flawed. I don't know everything. I'm trying to, like, I'm just trying to create context, right? Because I grew up
Hmm.
like, my parents know everything, right? Santa Claus was a thing, right? It's like, and then this dream of things, and they would create this magical dream world of stuff. And I'm like, and now as an adult, I'm doing the same thing for my kids. And my son's going through that transition of being a little boy to being a young man. And it's just starting to see things. And I'm like, okay, these are patterns. And and the thing that comes up the most is, like, I can see live the things that they're inheriting from us. And so I'd be like, oh, that's mine. That's not yours. So I got to go work on that stuff. So it's just
Right.
this gift of it, and you really start looking at it from that perspective, and it's really about perspective. And when I saw my parents, and like, in the constellation is a workshop. It's very much like an AA meeting or a Al-Anon meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
You sit in a circle, and there's dynamics that are pulled up in the constellation, and then you heal them, right? They're dealt with in that time. And what it does, it for the client, right, that's sitting there, they gain a new perspective of their internal family dynamics. That's all it does.
I think your kids are pretty lucky to have a dad like you who's like so aware of things because, it's gonna help them so much in the long run that you've also, stopped your, generational trauma. Like it ended with you and now you're raising, like two, I don't know if they're both boys, but two healthy children.
A
Um,
boy and a girl. Yeah,
a boy and a girl. So,
yeah, yeah,
good luck with the girl.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so I have a profound chance of dealing with my masculine and feminine side. So,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
But it's nice that, they're gonna also grow up aware,
Mm,
right? Like, and knowledgeable about these things because, you're open with them about it. And I think that's so important because often I think we we allow children, they need to be allowed to be kids, but at the
yeah.
same time, sometimes we can speak to them. They understand a lot more than we think that they
Hmm.
do at certain ages, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And they pick up so much. They're little antennas for the subconscious culture of the family, and it's so interesting. They'll say, from the mouth of babes, they'll say the thing that everybody's thinking about, that
Oh,
because they don't
yes,
have
yeah.
the social filter of being like, well, I shouldn't say
Hmm.
that. So they'll blurt something out, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? It's like, well, that's a clue,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
very blessed, because, my wife is open to this stuff, and we'll do, my kids will do meditate. So I have a series of guided meditations on YouTube that are all systemic. There are systemic guided meditations for people that need a 5 or 6 minute kind of just connection to their ancestry, and they're very short. They're free. I just do them out of my volunteer work, right? And
Oh,
they're
I
into it. They're
definitely
like,
need to listen to them because I can't meditate without a guided meditation. And your voice
okay,
is very, very like calm and collective, and it's
thank you,
smooth. So
thank you,
I definitely want to
thank
listen
you.
to one of those for sure.
Yeah. And I do have one on the inner child, which is,
Oh,
it's called the
cool.
integrated self. And I'll send it to you after the
Okay,
podcast.
awesome.
It's called the integrated self. And it goes through the stages of life, right? When you're, 3 or 4, and then as a young adult, right? That 11, 13 age. And then as a teenager and then as an adult. And it's just like your present self, and you collect all those people with you. And it's such a powerful thing. Also in constellations, we do these exercises, which are really cool, right? They're like, we call them mini constellations or exercises. And this is for, if you ever experience one of these, that's somebody that does this, is like, one of the coolest ones, and talking about inner child, is like, you do this thing where, you have four people represent your four stages, right? The inner child, the young adult, right? The adolescent self, and then the best version of you. And you have that person go through and connect with each person with their eyes, and then bring them with them. And then at the end, you have this circle of five people that you're all connected, you're all holding hands, and you're fully integrated with all the aspects of who you are. And you brought them all with you in that
It's
reconnection self.
awesome.
It's just like, it gives me goosebumps to be able to do that with people. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
bet. It's such a unique perspective that people just think, oh, trauma's generational and that's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's n not a lot of people who can recognize it and then also make the effort to, change it or stop it.
Hmm.
So, doing exercises like that just sounds like so interesting and so cool just to be able to, go back and gather up your inner children and, almost let them play together in a circle at all
Yeah.
different ages.
All the stages of you, that those are all the stages of you that you can bring back and connect. So yeah. Yeah. Going to that point is like, I do some work with an organization here. I live in South Florida.
Okay.
So we do this work with an organization that's called the Circle of Brotherhood, right? That is, Black men dealing with community, dealing with problems in their community.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's a lot of trauma, and so we do some of these constellations. And what we say is that we're in the generational, curses breaking business, and business is a booming. So
Yeah.
it really
Yeah.
puts together that stuff is like breaking those generational curses to people talk about generational trauma, but they don't talk about what you can do about it. And you can actually do something about it. There's powerful work that you can break it and be like, I can grow out of this, and it's not a curse. It's we can break these generational patterns.
And I think it's so important what you're doing because, it's providing a fresh perspective and also something practical that maybe people weren't even aware. Like when I was
Mm,
like trauma brain, there's not, there's one door. You don't see the other paths and the other doors. It's black or white. You pick one of two doors and that's the end of that. And
yeah,
after, putting my trauma brain in the trunk, I'm like, oh my God, there's all these paths and all these
yeah,
doors, and any of them could be mine.
yeah, yeah. And that's why it's and you nailed you hit the nail on the head. Is we're talking about perspective, right? Your focus goes through, when we're surviving, it's like our eyesight is myopic. We're just like looking through a pinhole, right? We're just saying like, get me out of here as fast as possible. I need
Hmm.
to escape. But this work does this, like it's there's opening a perspective that say, I'm not going to die. I'm safe. Now I can look around. You can start seeing things for what they are. And somebody, I had done, I've done this work with somebody, right? And they, first time they'd ever done constellations. And, she came up to me and said, I was sitting with my mom in my car, and there was a dynamic that would usually trigger her. And she said, now I took a second, and what you were saying before, right? Is like to take that stoic second, right? To say, like, all these emotions came up. She's like, is this belong to me, or does it belong to her?
Hmm.
And she was like able to change in a dynamic that was very present and repeating in her family system to no longer be a thing. So it's like this,
That's
like that.
so awesome. It's so
Oh
powerful.
man, just that is like, oh, that's the reward of this work, is just simply to give people the tools to be able to do that, something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, I would like, after, we do one podcast and release it, but I would love to have you back on again and we can like just literally like pick apart a trauma topic because you're so well informed and you're so well spoken and you come at it with a different approach. And I think nowadays people, with the economy the way it is, people can't afford $200 an hour for therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So many people, reach out to me and they ask me, like, can you help me, get through this crisis or whatever the case may be. Uh, and then the next question is like, is it going to cost me anything? And,
Yeah.
my gift back to the world is no, no.
Yeah.
I didn't have money to pay for the therapy when I needed it the most.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I can give back for free, it's such a blessing and such a gift to be able to do so.
Yeah.
And I see you
Absolutely.
doing the same thing
Yeah.
just taking this knowledge that, this approach that isn't really well known in North America yet, but it
Mm-hmm.
will be.
Yeah.
You know, you're building it up, and the more people that know about it, the more people can practice it,
Yeah.
and the more generational trauma that can be broken. And
Yeah.
as soon as that happens, I feel like there could literally be like a shift in the world.
Yeah. And if we look at ourselves as units in the system, the more you heal, the more I heal, right? The more, the your ecosystem heals, the more my ecosystem heals. We're all in service to each other. And that's, we're all connected in some way, right? Whether that's geographically or through roads or, if everybody around me is just a little bit, more polite on the road, right? That would
Oh
significantly
my
change my life,
God.
right? So looking at it just from as practical as you can be is like, you go ahead, no worries, and you just keep moving forward would drastically change everybody's lives. So it's just about, putting points on the board is how I look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sharing that perspective and making it you know easily understandable, I think, is so important, because we get lost in all this technical garbage and all these labels. Everyone's label this and label that, and I
Hmm.
am you this, and again, it comes back to, you're not your label, you're not your trauma.
Yeah.
You are unfortunately responsible to deal with it. But if you can deal with it, there's always a gift at the end.
Yeah.
You have to start the work. And
Yeah.
once you start the work, it's like everything, like opening a book, that once you read a couple of pages, maybe you want to read a couple of more, and then you just keep going. Before you know it, you read the book.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you curse on the podcast?
Yeah, curse, man.
Okay,
Sure.
perfect. So the thing that says on the back of my shirt, it says work on your shit. That's it. So work on your shit. You're dragging around
Yes.
all this shit. Just work on it. Like, it's try to make it in the most practical terms as possible. There's a lot of posturing on this stuff, and like, I am a this or you are a that, and they're like, just dude, you're running around with a bag of shit. Deal with it. Like, you're
I
it
need
and
that
it
shirt.
yeah, yeah, I'll get you one. I'll get you one. Send me your address and I'll get you a shirt. But it's
Oh,
just simply
awesome.
like, it's just simply work on your shit, right? It's just like, it's
Yeah.
your everything. If your hands are dirty and everything you touch, you're gonna just wash them. Like, it's your nobody else is can do it for you. You gotta just do that
Yeah.
stuff internally, and
Yeah.
and just suddenly life gets better, right?
It really does. Like, sometimes I struggle with, if I have a really good day, then the next day I like crash.
Mm,
Like that almost emotional hangover from having a
yeah,
good day, because I still have to remind myself, I'm a big proponent of, it's okay to not be okay.
yeah,
Right? But I'm also a big proponent of, if you're a trauma survivor, it's okay to be okay.
yeah,
Right? Because you
yeah,
almost have to give yourself permission that it is okay to
yeah,
be okay, because you've been not okay for so long
yeah,
that just becomes the standard. And
yeah,
now when I have a good day, I'm like, wait a second, I need to pause on this too. Not just pause on the bad shit. I need to pause on the good
mm,
shit too, and, reflect on it and take it in. Because I think it's part of the healing process, is also allowing yourself to recognize that, you know, you deserve good things. You deserve to be loved and to be cared for, and, to have all the things that you missed out on life. And you can actually go back and give yourself so much of that, through inner child work, through your work, through, all sorts of perspectives of just realizing that parents are simply people with their
yeah,
own shit and their own trauma. You didn't come with a handbook.
yeah,
Okay, there was no
exactly,
guidebook that
exactly.
popped out with you.
Yeah,
So,
exactly, exactly. Yeah, when
I
I left
think
the hospital with my kid, I was like, "Are you seriously going to give me a person to take care of? Like,
what do I do with
this
this?
shouldn't even be legal, you know?"
I didn't have to get a license for this. So weird.
Exactly.
That's
You
so
know,
crazy.
yeah. And
Awesome.
what you were saying, something came up for me is like there is such a thing as pronoia, right? Rather than paranoia, pronoia, that you can achieve a state where you feel like the universe is conspiring in your favor rather than against you, right? And that you can achieve this
I never thought
momentum,
about that.
right? That there's this pronoia, and that's what, like I tried to look at it like a Richter score, or like a scale that goes up and down. Like you have these high highs and then you have these low lows. I'm trying to live in the Goldilocks era that my life goes to, and I'm going to
Yes.
lose parents. I'm going to have things happen in my life, and that those are all just movements in my calm sea of my existence, not these storms that come in and just wreck everything, right? That I'm just running through life and doing the best that I can with what I have.
What's helped me recently too is to look at a situation like when I first started the podcast back up. I ran it for a couple of years before COVID. Then, COVID just whatever. And then I was like, oh my God, who wants to listen? Do I want to listen to me? Who wants to listen to me talk? Like, this is ridiculous, right? And then so now I'm doing this thing like worst case scenario. I was like, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is no one listens and I don't have to do another podcast. Like, it's not
Yeah.
life ending. It's not going to change my life in any, way, shape, or form. So therefore, the risk to take is okay. It's a
Yep.
safe risk for me to take because it's not like going to cause me any big internal trauma. So that's actually allowed me to step out of my comfort zone and get
That's
back
powerful.
into. I never thought I'd go to space. Not in my life. I didn't
Yeah,
even
that's
go to
powerful.
spaces until recently, right?
Yeah.
So it's just it's a blessing to be able to see things from a different perspective, and
Yep.
especially look at yourself from a different perspective.
Yeah. With a little bit of kindness will go a long way.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, I appreciate your time. I thank you so much for your knowledge and for, sharing what you do and sharing who you are. I would love
Yeah.
to do this again.
Yeah. I would love
Um,
to too. Yeah. That would
awesome.
be great.
So yeah, we'll set up another date and we'll, pick a trauma topic and we'll just like attack it because I am like
Absolutely.
a firm believer in, the more talk there is about trauma,
Yeah.
it's gonna help more people. And you're very knowledgeable, you're very wise, and you're very kind. So
Thank you, Jody. I
I
appreciate it.
appreciate you. I appreciate you coming to the space. I appreciate your time today, and I appreciate sharing your knowledge with everyone. It's
Thank you
uh,
for
it's
having me.
awesome. It's just such a great perspective, and
Yeah.
you're just a great person. I knew as soon as you came into the space, I was like, oh man, I got to get this guy on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored. I really am.
So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time. My dog, if you can hear in the background, is rolling around my bed like a maniac with her tail wagging.
That's good. That's good.
Groaning. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so let's catch up soon then.
All right. Thank you, Jody. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, John. You take care of yourself and have a fantastic day.
Will do. Same to you.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mental Health Raw and Open podcast with your host, Jody Betty. If you enjoyed today's show, please give it a like and don't forget to smash that subscribe button. And if you appreciate the work I do, why not buy me a coffee? Details in the show notes. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Dorian Kent and produced by Jody Betty and Dorian Kent. This has been a Raw and Open production.